Let's dive right in. Can you tell us a little bit about BrandLab?
Yeah, of course. We are a custom content studio. Means that we are the ones who create. We are in the creation business. And we do all sorts of different products for our partners, from kind of traditional lead gen to thought leadership to really custom things. Like I can't emphasize the custom part of what we do. And at the end of the day, and this Steph has teed us up so nicely here, we're storytellers. I mean, that's really what we do. And I remember when I first came to BrandLab thinking, like saying that and thinking it was almost kind of hokey. Like storytelling is such a just thing in the zeitgeist right now. It is this really popular thing, this word that people throw out all the time. Like, what does that actually mean? But it is true. We are in the business of helping folks communicate their message to their intended audience in a way that resonates with that audience, in a way that's attractive, in a way that they care about, and create a compelling narrative. There is that humanization aspect to it that has been touched on earlier. There is that element of focusing in on hearing from subject matter experts, the folks who are in the field, in the lab, that trusted voice. You're going to hear a lot of yes anding from me as the final group of folks who are going today. Every time someone was speaking earlier, I'd go, I was going to say that. I was going to say that. And I started viewing it as less of a, oh no, and more of a, okay, we can yes and this. But yeah, so we hear from those trusted voices in the field, in the lab, on the ground. I'm a science communicator by training. I'm a PhD by training, but I came to this world as a scientist who communicated when I was in my research world into being a science communicator as a professional and a professional storyteller. Literally, it was part of one of my jobs, to a scientist who taught communication to scientists. And so the marketing world, I wouldn't say is new to me anymore, but that is not my native environment. I really care about communication and I really care about storytelling and those aspects. And it's a long-winded answer, of course, but that's what we in BrandLab do. And that's what we really care about.
You talked a little bit about standing out to your target audience and earning their trust and attention. What are some of the challenges that brands face in doing that?
I think first thing is just options. And I mean, options of when folks are looking for content, where they go. There are so many different audiences out there. There's so many different options for audiences. There's 1,000 different places where content exists. But I think what's really crucial is how do we understand our audiences? Like, who do we know? How do you engage with that audience? Knowing your audience is the most important thing, but also can be really, really hard to do. Telling a great story, that's fantastic. Having a great message, crucial. But if you don't know who you're communicating to, it just falls flat. With the science communication background, some of you might be familiar with this. There's this idea of the deficit model of communication. And we talk about this a lot in science communication in particular, but folks are not just like the reason they don't understand something or something doesn't resonate with them isn't because they lack that information. It's not just about having a deficit of information. This comes up a lot in more contentious issues like trust in science, whether it be climate change or evolution, whatever it might be. But it's like, oh, if we just tell them the information, if we provide them the information they need to have, then they'll just accept it and they'll just take it in. It doesn't work that way in any mode of communication. And the type of communication that we do, the type of marketing that we do is no different. So it's not enough to have a really good, compelling message. The biggest challenge is knowing who that message is for and knowing what will resonate with them.
So I guess like going into the audience a little bit more, what role does audience research play in developing content?
I mean, it's crucial. It is like it. I mean, it's something you all will hear me say so many times, but I can't emphasize that enough. And it is crucial in everything we do, and we all do it without even realizing it. No matter who we're talking to, whether it be in a professional capacity or in a personal capacity, we're always tailoring our message to our audience. When I was teaching SciComm, we would work with fellow researchers who got sometimes would be resistant and be like, why should I have to dumb down my research, dumb down my message to make it more accessible for other folks? And I would tell them it's not about dumbing anything down. It's about communicating it's about having a conversation in a way that's accessible for everyone. It's about a shared language, a shared understanding. So it's not someone's here, and you're coming down. It's about coming to the middle. It's about meeting in the middle. We all do this every single day in our conversations with folks. We talk to I'm going to assume, sure. We talk to professional colleagues different than we talk to family members, different than we talk to um, maybe our friends, whatever it might be. So we're doing this all the time anyways. It's a matter of taking that idea of how do we have this shared communication and translating it from something we're doing already and might not be aware of, frankly, and being more deliberate about it in kind of a professional context.
So I guess on the other side, with every brand kind of becoming the content creator, what are some of the ways in which they can stand out against their competition?
I think it is, and this is an easy thing for me to say as a custom content studio that's trying to get business. But it's not being hesitant to try something new. And that again, I cannot stress how easy that is for me to say sitting up here. I don't necessarily mean getting away from things like lead generation. Lead gen is not going anywhere, and I completely understand that. It is a giant part of our industry of what we do, and we will constantly be doing creating products and working with partners to do lead generation types of things. And it doesn't have to be a giant new project. We have come across situations with BrandLab where maybe it is literally like changing the cover of an ebook to be more engaging from our standard cover. And that little bit of a switch, which was not a huge investment either time-wise or monetarily, would get many more leads in kind of a traditional package or traditional product, or even just changing the narrative of the types of, let's say, white papers that we do. There was an example of one we worked on recently with a partner where it was about the focus was drug discovery and working with government institutions in a partnership. And this specific white paper had very few hard scientific science citations in it. It was just like kind of the way it worked. But what it was a focus on the partnership. It was focused on that relationship that they built. And they told a story, and we helped them craft that narrative within that white paper that was, I wouldn't say like abnormal, but it wasn't the kind of the more popular narratives that we would tell inside of a lot of our more common white papers. And I think this is right, but we exceeded the like promised lead generation goal of what's usually maybe a month, I think in a week or so. And maybe that's an N of one. I'm a scientist. I understand how that works, right? I get that. Okay. But it's a great example. So it's not necessarily like I love the idea of creating truly custom campaigns and content for folks. I love when folks come to us and they say, we have an idea of this specific thing we want to talk about, this story we want to tell, this new product, this new initiative, this new campaign. What is the best way to do that? I get that that's not always going to happen in an ideal world. That'd be fantastic. We just all have a lot of money to do those types of things. But those small little touches can make a really big difference. And so it doesn't have to be like trying something new doesn't have to be this giant endeavor, I'd say.
You touched on the BrandLab process a little bit. Can you walk us through a typical engagement, and what are some of the steps that you take to ensure the campaign is successful?
Yeah, of course. When someone comes to BrandLab and when our colleagues, our sales representatives bring us BrandLab business, the first question we always have for a partner is, what's your goal? What do you want out of this? Whether it be a product or a campaign or initiative, whatever it might be, like we need to know what they want to get out of it. And it's not necessarily like what deliverable do you want, though sometimes it is, sure. But the first question is, it's like the notebook. What do you want? All right. Like, what do you want out of this? What is your goal? After we know that goal, then it's like, okay, then what's the best way to do this? We are I was trying to figure out a better way to say this, but we're not necessarily precious about medium per se. Like if someone comes to us and they want a specific type of product, we will work with them for that product. But if they come to us and they say, all right, this is their goal, this is what they want to get out of it, maybe it might be something different than what they wanted. We want to help them tell the best story, have the best message that they possibly can. So it's the what is your goal? And then how should we do this? And how can we work together to do that? How the path progresses from there is dependent upon the relationship, the partner, whatever it might be. But those are the two kind of big things. And in all of this is audience. I'm not saying it all the time because it's just kind of the umbrella over which or under which all of this happens, but it's who are you trying to communicate to? But yeah, what's your goal? How do you want to do it? And of course, who is your intended audience?
And how would you say BrandLab's approach is different than other custom content studios? Deep sigh.
I no, so again, there's a lot of yes anding because this has been like a quick aside, someone outside asked me like what I was thinking about today a little bit earlier about all of the sessions and all the different speakers. And I've been to a lot of conferences in my day, both as a researcher and then in my kind of new world, not new anymore. And I've learned so much today in like this entire day, and it's been so fantastic. And the answer to this question is our focus on story and our focus on the science behind communication. There is a science to how people communicate. I'm not going to say how old I am. My researcher me didn't believe in social science. I was a hard scientist. I was a very stereotypical one. So this idea that there's a science behind communication would have just appalled younger Shane. But of course there is. Of course there is. And so we try to apply some of that science behind communication into best practices of what we do. And so when I say story, there's a science behind story. There's a science behind personal narrative and injecting those voices in there and how it resonates with folks and how people trust one another and how they trust the content we're coming out with because of that. So it's all of that mixed together. And that's something we really put first. We really care about that message and how we're communicating and the trust we're putting in there. And another thing I mentioned this before, but yeah, we're not necessarily precious about the medium through which we do this. We care about the message first, and then we figure out what's the best way to do that, what's the best way to work with our partners to get not only like what we want, but of course what they want, and to get the message out and the deliverable out to the audience of their choosing to make sure that to the best of everyone's abilities, we're all quite happy with the final product.
You were talking a little bit about mediums, so let's touch base on that. So content distribution strategies are always changing and evolving. What trends are you seeing that are most effective for communicating with scientists?
Yeah, this happened in last session. One of the speakers brought up LinkedIn. I was like, man, I was going to talk about that. And I'm still going to talk about it because here we are. I think that there used to be a big, a giant presence of scientists on Twitter when Twitter was Twitter. And that no longer exists. There's still a community there, but there was a thing literally known as science Twitter. And like the scientists were all on Twitter. And some of them have just left the platform altogether. Some of them have switched over to platforms like Blue Sky. But there is if not a migration and in a rediscovery of LinkedIn accounts that they made 20 years ago that they forgot about. And they're like, oh, I'm on LinkedIn. And I think that scientists are there, but also it's not necessarily even just like scientists who are interested in doing the work, but it is folks who have the decision makers. They have, whether that's purchasing power, whether that's sway with their colleagues, whether those are whoever it might be. I think LinkedIn is a fantastic platform for that. And I personally been on the platform for a while, but I've even seen, like, I've been engaging more, frankly. And I'll give a plug for Jesse. So Jesse's on the BrandLab team as well. You heard from him earlier, who, if you don't follow Jesse, who is just a LinkedIn wizard. And I think that not that one platform is going to be the end all be all by any means, but there's a lot of folks on there and a lot of really great opportunity there. And I also will say, regardless of the platform, but LinkedIn does this, and obviously Instagram, but a emphasis on distribution via multimedia. We have seen anecdotally, I have seen anecdotally, and I've kind of like soft tested this in some other adventures, but the promoting something just via text, via literal just text, versus putting up any sort of visual. It doesn't. I'm not gonna say the visual doesn't matter, but it almost like doesn't matter. People are going to be more drawn to that, and platforms like LinkedIn, platforms like Instagram, like Facebook. Steph was mentioning Facebook earlier. Platforms that have, I mean, they all have some sort of option for video or pictures or visuals, but that mix of that kind of multimodal mix, no matter the platform, but LinkedIn is kind of the one of choosing right now, can make a big difference. So I know it was a very social media centric answer, but that's how a lot of our the word gets out essentially.
So before the social media promotion comes into play, and thinking a little bit beyond the single piece of content, what are some long-term audience engagement strategies through content?
Don't do single pieces of content. And again, I will recognize literally like where I'm sitting and figuratively the position I'm in. It's easy for you to say like, let's do multiple things. Let's do long-term campaigns. Let's like have the opportunity to tell a much broader story. But it matters when we work with a partner and do a single piece of content, and it's let's say it's an ebook about subject X. Someone reads that and reads about subject X, and they go, oh yeah, this is a really interesting thing. It's like really great, either initiative or product or whatever it might be. And then they see who it's from, like that association is there. Sure, fine. But if that's the only time they ever see that association between the message that's coming out and the person or the company who put it out, it's less likely that that will click with them. Whereas if they see multiple products or a multi-product campaign or just a whatever it might be, if they see that re-engagement, they see message, company, message, company, message, company, message, brand. There's more of a likelihood for that connection to be made and for that to stay. And so, yes, like I love working with folks over longer periods of time because frankly, it's good for business, but there is an opportunity to tell a more meaningful story and for the brand, for the company to be able to get more long-term engagement and more quality engagement. So it's frankly, I think it's win-win when it comes to that.
And when you're working with a brand, what role does an organization's subject matter experts play in a brand's content development?
Oh, that's crucial. Yeah, I mean, if folks have the experts, use them, utilize them. If like this is kind of going against my what I've been saying previously, but if you have it like in house, like utilize that expertise. I will say it's different, but uh, from a from an in-house expertise at ACS, not just BrandLab, but marketing and sales, the expertise we have in our department, we have in-time expertise to market ACS, and we utilize that expertise. We do across the entire marketing and sales department, and so like we are utilizing that expertise in-house. Uh, Again, to do something a little bit different, but still, we're definitely leveraging that. If folks don't have that expertise, there are places like us, like we exist for a reason. Partners come to us with an ask, and with something, with a message they want to communicate, and we are there to work with them on it. So of course, like I would love for folks to come work with BrandLab, but the biggest thing is like leveraging the expertise wherever that expertise is, because at the end of the day, it's really important to find the right people to tell those stories, to communicate those messages, no matter where those people might be.
All right, last question. What do you think will be the next big thing in branded content, and how should brands prepare for it?
I just this wasn't like this wasn't originally in what I had. I just wrote AI after this morning. Uh, it's like, oh yeah, I personally will not dive into that, but of course it is, of course, and Paul, you such a great presentation on that. But the my answer from a what we can kind of control right now at least, and I touched on this a bunch, but it's this longer term investment and maybe getting into, I can't stress enough, not out of the lead gen game, but more into doing an into thought leadership or these bigger ideas. That slide that I think Dylan put up earlier about like, how do you convince your CEOs? How do you convince your higher ups to kind of think differently or do this and versus this or? I like took a picture of it. I looked at it. I just think this is what we like I've been wanting to see because it's going to be difficult. It has been difficult to convince folks to try something new. Or again, I would say do that and. It doesn't necessarily have to be an or. But I think and I hope that there's going to be more investment, of course, from a dollar amount, but just from an effort, from a like collaboration perspective to do more kind of this working together to tell the best story, to get the best message out, and to make sure that the content is being communicated in kind of like the best way possible.
Any questions from the audience?
I am also a recent PhD turned science communicator. So I was wondering what you think the importance of like scientists and science-informed content is in like marketing today, and any advice you would have for someone who was an academic and is now like thrust into communications and marketing.
Oh my gosh, it's so important. It's scientists as communicators is a really interesting concept because I've seen all across the spectrum, and I don't. I mean, we do have scientists who are communicators, scientists who are marketers, everything kind of in between. And I think, Frank, this might be more specific to this specific question and you versus everyone in the room. I apologize, but this is something I'm really passionate about. Anyone in the science space needs to be able to talk about what they do. They don't need to be a professional communicator about it. They don't even need to be able to market themselves, so that'd be super great. But it's this idea of just communication is so important in any industry and in any profession. I think every single one of us in this room should be able to talk to people and tell people what we do. That's a challenge for me, frankly, in this role that I'm in right now. Is a lot easier when I was just a scientist who taught other scientists how to talk to non-scientists. Like, that's a great soundbite. But I think it's just no matter what the profession is, but specifically for scientists, either who are still doing research or who have kind of left the bench, left the bench, let's say, being able to communicate is incredibly important. And then being able to like understand marketing and frankly not think it's like an icky thing because there's this stigma in many scientific circles, and I say that from point of knowing and from a point of experience, that's like, oh, we shouldn't have to market ourselves, or oh, you shouldn't have to market science. And that's actually, I sort of said that's a misconception, that like we don't have to think about science marketing. So I think being able to communicate is thing number one, and then either being able to market or understand the value of marketing and work with those folks who can do that are two kind of really crucial points.
I learned a lot from you guys too, so this is awesome. And I was looking for data furiously because you talked about a couple of things: simplicity and singularity of message and creative. That Kantar brand study thing that I referenced earlier has some actual data and statistics that backs that up in terms of effectiveness of creative, and the campaigns that tend to win the awards have more single focus in them than something that's muddled. That's kind of obvious, but it's more on the data. The other thing that you mentioned too was a commitment to long term. It's something that we stress both to ourselves at our agency, but also to our clients, in that it's tempting to get bored of something that you look at all the time, and you forget that your prospects or your audience are looking at it a lot less than you are. So it's like, well, it's been 6 months, it's been a year, time for a new campaign. And that's not always the case. And there's also data in that book. And I'd be happy to share the PDF with you guys afterwards if anyone wants it, that supports significant increase in performance for brands that stick with something over a long period of time, whether that's a campaign, a singular message. So wholeheartedly support that. Now I'll get to a question. Can you talk about instances in which you've partnered with other agencies, right? I see all of us as colleagues. Sometimes we're competitors, but in this form, colleagues. And I think there's probably opportunities to partner with other marketing teams, whether they're on the client side or other agencies. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, that's actually that's something we've been talking about a little bit more. Cynthia and I have this conversation on a somewhat regular basis that we are certainly interested in. It's not necessarily something we've done previously, for no specific. There's not a we're not definitely not opposed to that. I think honestly, leveraging the expertise of the right folks is so important, regardless of where that expertise comes from. It's kind of to that subject matter expert perspective, but more like you said, we're all kind of in this together. There is there's a lot of kind of like, we have a list of things that BrandLab does, whether that be deliverables or who we partner with or anything like that. And then there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that we don't necessarily talk about that often because it is so not necessarily singular, but it requires relationships. It requires kind of like this out of the box thinking. And I think we'd love the opportunity to work with other folks in this space, both to provide our expertise, but also to pull in the expertise of other folks to, again, just help the partners that we're working with to create for the stuff that we're creating, just to help them get the best thing, to help them to get the best product, to tell that best story. So the short answer is yes, like definitely interested in working with all of you in any way that we possibly can.
I was listening to you talk, Shane. I was just trying to absorb it all and think I need to update my slides, I think, basically, because when you were talking about the content production process that you have and the storytelling part, and I hope nobody takes away from my section that you should never do an ebook and a white paper again, because that's not the point. The point is, don't just keep remixing content that's already been made, that doesn't offer any value, that nobody cares about, because that's not where the interesting stuff is. So then I started to think, and this is the question, Shane, is how do you balance telling really good, interesting stories with sometimes the commercial imperative to want to thrust a product into the front so that we're selling stuff? How do you manage that balance?
No, that's a fantastic question. And it's something I wrestle with isn't the right word. It's just I come to terms with. Every single thing we do is not going to be the most, just frankly, the most like creative thing that we've ever created in our entire lives. And that is one, a-okay, and two, oftentimes completely dependent on the partner we're working with. And so and not to say we put 100% of ourselves into everything we do. That is not what I'm saying, or I'm not saying we're not doing that. It's just sometimes the specific project is this partner wants this thing, and this is just how it is. And like that is completely fine. And we are happy to do that. And we love those types of projects. But for me personally, I then look to there's always a balance. There is going to be that opportunity to do something a little bit more custom. I would say, again, I'll speak for me personally, a little bit more creative. And so it's like kind of with any sort of job. It's like when I was a researcher, there were different parts of the process that I liked a lot more than others. I loved being out in the field, doing the experiments. I literally was out in the field. I was an ecologist. I hated writing grants. I hated getting money to do the things I needed to do. So it's just how what we're doing in our space. Not that I hate anything we're doing, but there's going to be different levels of enjoyment, different levels of creativity. And so the balance is just, we will always put everything we have into it, but selfishly do relish the opportunities to kind of do that capital C custom work.
Do you have any like tips and tricks or like frameworks that you use where you can tell a really interesting, provocative story and find a commercial angle without cheapening the story? Like, I find that really hard. And if you've got any tips, I'd love to hear.
No. No, and that's not necessarily meant to be a cop out. When we do have those opportunities to tell incredibly compelling stories, we approach them all so differently. And I think that's when really figuring out what our partner's goal is. Like, when we ask them, what's the story you want to tell? And sometimes they just kind of back up and like, story? I didn't really think about that. And so there frankly is more there's more collaboration, there's more time, there's more work that goes into that with those types of partners. But if they I do have an answer. If you can get, if we can get immediate buy-in, if we can say things like story or narrative or whatever it might be, and we don't see them kind of back away, then we know we have them, and we can really get into doing something custom and not, I guess, say like cheapening it. But I think it's just we always have calls with partners. We always do that sort of thing, and just really gauging that initial interaction, like kind of what that first impression is. And usually we can get a good sense from there about what angle we can go in and manage their expectations, but also manage our own expectations.
I do appreciate everything you're sharing. It really helps, especially as a creator, to hear some things. But what I have to say might not be so popular, and it goes back to something that I remember. If this is right, so J.K. Rowling, when she submitted the manuscript of Sorcerer's Stone, was rejected, as we all know. And if the story's right, when she submitted to Bloomberg, um, it was passed to a daughter of at the company, and she read it, and that's why it got published. And I just share that because I'm not a LinkedIn fan. I'll be honest with you. I don't hang out at LinkedIn. Obviously, I'm in a different creator world, right? But you have to recognize that, yeah, maybe your audience does, but people that are connected to your audience might not. Or maybe your audience, when they're not at work, hangs out other places. So if I just share that because I feel like that partly why I'm here to bring in that little flavor of the world outside of LinkedIn. And for me, it feels like I'm at work when I'm at LinkedIn.
We are constantly doing a much smaller version of what Steph was talking about with this larger kind of like social media strategy at ACS. I say LinkedIn, but we are aware that different folks engage on different platforms in very different ways. And so no matter how we are, I'll say promoted, there might be a better way to say that, we are to the best of our abilities ensuring that we are trying to engage with whoever's there in a way that they care about. And frankly, just like, this might sound hokey, but trying to have fun with it. Because I used to do in a previous life, like TikTok videos about science communication with my dog that everyone in the ACS staff now knows about. So you all might as well know about it. And so that was a very different audience. So yes, I'm going to yes and that as well. I mentioned LinkedIn because we're professionally doing a lot of stuff on there, but there's a whole world out there, and that you are completely right to acknowledge that. Okay, thank you all.